Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Wiss. I'm on the MySQL team at Oracle. It's been great to have such a wonderful day today. Have you found the sessions useful? If so, please applaud. Fantastic. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. For those of us who worked with him over the years, it had been a true pleasure, probably the most exciting times of our professional career. You know, MySQL always talked about wanting to change the world. For those of us who have had the honor to work with this man, in many ways he changed our lives, both professionally and personally. And for him, I also want him to know we're in great hands with the team in Oracle. It's been a great experience. So without further ado, I want to introduce the former CEO of MySQL, the current CEO of Eucalyptus Systems, Mårten Mickos.
Thanks. Oops. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. This is like a family reunion, I think. Although the family has grown, and I would like to start by congratulating MySQL on so successfully taking over Oracle. And I'm also happy that in remembrance of a great Silicon Valley company, this day is actually called the MySQL Sunday. So anyhow, I'm here to talk about databases and what we did in the past a little bit and where we are heading in the future. And as you know, MySQL was always a disruptor and an enfant terrible and tried to disrupt the whole world. Today it seems to me that MySQL is the establishment, and I believe MySQL has a lot of growth still to see, both in install base and in open source deployments and in revenues. So I think that can be a huge thing, and I'm very happy to see that so many of former MySQL employees are now working for Oracle and bring it to even greater successes. And I hear that version 5.5 is even faster than people had expected. That's great. So the question is, of course, where all of this is heading and what's happening with the cloud today, and is perhaps MySQL in a cloudy situation, or does it have a good future? And like I already hinted at, I think there are great things happening in the MySQL environment. We also see a fragmentation of the ecosystem into many smaller players and larger players, and that's typically something that happens only to the very successful projects, and I think it over time will just strengthen the community. So in many ways, it was a victory for MySQL. I think there was a very rational reason for a very large and successful closed source company who had everything in the world, well, nearly, to pay over $7 billion to become an open source vendor. And I think that's a very significant moment of victory for MySQL, for Java, for open source, for MySQL users, for developers, for you who are here in the audience, and the tens of millions of people who are using and depending on MySQL every day. And I think you will be successful. I also happen to think that Oracle will be very successful with MySQL going forward. I have no doubt that it will be a successful business, both measured in revenues and in install base and popularity of the product. So those were the great old days. Look at this slide from 2002. You can still find it on mysql.com. It's a quick poll that we launched in January 2002, and we asked people whether their bosses knew about their use. 90% operated on their own, outside of corporate policy, without their boss knowing, without their wife knowing, sometimes without themselves knowing, outside the SQL standard, sometimes outside transactional integrity. And these people were wild and happy and very successful. That was the MySQL of the time. And we didn't want at that time to be Oracle, and we never wanted to be. We wanted to be ourselves and something else. And there were some people who called MySQL a glorified file system, as if that were something negative. And we felt that if Google's entire revenue stream runs on MySQL, and Facebook's entire social graph runs on MySQL, what's wrong with being a glorified file system? Better to be a glorified nothing than a despised everything. Another great thing we had in MySQL was transactional integrity through the fantastic InnoDB storage engine. And Heikki Tuuri, one of our time's best database engine developers, had developed it on his own. And he surprised us one day by selling his company to Oracle and taking employment there. So suddenly the keys to the transactional world for MySQL were held by the gorilla of the transactional world. But we didn't let that slow us down. Instead, we turned to the MySQL community and showed that the community is stronger than everything, that open source is stronger than anything you can ever imagine. And I was quoted as saying that trying to kill MySQL by buying InnoDB is like trying to kill a dolphin by drinking the ocean. There are so many storage engines out there, and there still are. But we also learned that Oracle had very good plans for MySQL, and specifically our thanks go to Dr. DBA, Ken Jacobs, who became the special agent from Oracle, who would bridge the, back then, long distance between corporate closed source world and entrepreneurial open source world. Until the day would come that open source and corporate is more of a synonym than an antonym. And that's where we are today. You can see it as good news or bad news, but open source has become a corporate ingredient for every successful company in the IT sector on the planet. It's not just in business software, it's in the telecom world, it's in the mobile world, it's all over the place, and specifically in infrastructure. So in many ways, MySQL won and Oracle won too. So then how big is MySQL? I don't know anymore because I don't have access to the reports. But there's a very simple method that you now can help me with. There's an error message that goes like this. Provided argument is not a valid MySQL result resource, or something like that. And of course, it's only websites who truly run on MySQL who can display that error message at any time. So please, if you're online now, search on the internet in quotation marks for the string is not a valid MySQL and tell me how many hits you get. I thought you were online all the time. Okay, so I have a backup. I did it this morning. Google found 1 billion hits. So I thought, okay, this is Google. They have Google mania. So I checked with Bing, 80 million hits. So the installed base of MySQL is on the order of 80 million. Last time I was in charge, we claimed 12 million. And there's a good reason for this enormous installed base, and that is because MySQL is the most suitable database for web deployments, for cloud deployments. And now as MySQL has become part of the establishment, I have a concrete proposal to make to Oracle Corporation. I think it's time to turn around the dolphin, like I have it on my slide. When we had a graphical designer in Finland design the logo originally, he presented it first with the dolphin jumping from left to upper right, like everything has to do in a Western male-dominated world. But we said, no, we want to be different. Can you turn around the dolphin and make it surprisingly jump from right to left? And that's how the famous logotype of MySQL, the Sakila dolphin, emerged as a feisty, surprising, happy dolphin jumping from right to left. But now, as we are in a state where Robin Hood and his merry men have ridden out of the Sherwood Forest and into the castle, I think it's time to perhaps go back to the original design with the dolphin jumping as the establishment typically does from left to right. So that's my concrete proposal to Oracle. $1.1 billion. Giuseppe found 1.1 billion MySQL error messages in the world. And of course, somebody would say that it's bad with error messages, but actually that's a life sign. It means something is running on MySQL. And it means that there's a need for training for MySQL users. But let's look at the relational database world. When we grew up with MySQL in the late 90s and then 2000, 2001 and onwards, the relational database market was very much dominated by strong, massive players. And the strengths they displayed were a complex feature set, very good ability to scale up on very expensive hardware, and ACID compliance. ACID, as you know, stands for atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. And then they were seen as weaknesses, the new vendors who came out with simple products that scaled out rather than scaling up, and that didn't necessarily support transactional integrity in its fullest form. But the amazing thing is that as we are shifting from client-server over to cloud, and we're now seeing the sort of last farewell to client-server, software needs to be inherently distributed, and it needs to operate on similarly equipped computer nodes. And for that to work, you need products with a very simple architecture so that they can scale out. You need non-acid operation at time, and you talk about eventual consistency. So suddenly the strengths of the past are becoming weaknesses, and the weaknesses of the past are becoming strengths. And here also we can see that there's a major dilemma now that all these brilliant database engineers are dealing with. The fact that ACID compliance was a strength back then, and it continues to be a strength. But non-ACID operation is also a strength. So how do you bridge this gap where the database needs to operate at times under strict transactional control and at times not? MySQL solved it by having different storage engine, which was a brilliant design decision. And there are many other ways of doing that as well. So that's why we have so many new players here in this field. And I apologize to all startups that I may have missed out on, because this list changes every day. But some very innovative new players who are building databases for the cloud, where it's all about simplicity, it's about distributed use, it's about scaling out, it's dealing with the new demands on computing. And you find key value stores here, you find main memory databases, you find what is it called, the Hadoop algorithm, MapReduce, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking of something else. So MapReduce, you find all these different aspects. You find column-oriented databases. And interestingly, in this world, the innovation has two sides. There's the MySQL-centric world. We have players who are building additions to MySQL, players who are building similarities to the MySQL environment, like Membase, which is similar to Memcached. And then you have the other world where they're coming out with entirely new paradigms. And it's still a little bit early to say what will work and what won't work, but it's amazing to see that the database industry, once again, for the first time in maybe 30 years, is up for grabs. There's a rewrite going on of the new ideal database, and sure, it will take years because infrastructure software is difficult to build, but over time we will see some of these, or maybe a new product that we don't even see on this slide, come up and solve some very significant business need in the future cloud environment. So what does then Eucalyptus do, which is the company I'm CEO of? So I'll give you some history. When I left Sun Microsystems in March 2009, I asked everybody, a little bit jokingly, but very seriously, so what's bigger than open source? And there were two responses that came back repeatedly. One was the mobile internet, and the other one was cloud computing. So slowly but surely, I became very passionate about cloud computing. I looked around, I was introduced to the Eucalyptus team. I found that it's one of the most brilliant teams of computer scientists I've ever met. They completely understand distributed computing and how you build things that from the get-go need to operate on many different machines. And that's why I applied for the job, and they luckily accepted me as CEO, and here I am. And a cloud platform, what it does for you is it makes your application elastic. It doesn't have to be a web application, but it most typically is, because in the cloud most applications are web-based. So you add elasticity to it. You can add nodes, you can remove nodes, you can easily scale up and scale down, and you scale separately on the transactional side and on the resource side, meaning your usage number can scale on its own, and then separately you scale the hardware infrastructure underneath. That is what it does. It doesn't bring you specific new functionality. It doesn't bring you stored procedures if you don't have them. It is just a cloud platform that runs on top of your hypervisor. Many of you know Amazon's web services and you use them. Eucalyptus is an implementation of the exact same API, but running in your own corporate data center on your own servers. And if you like to build your business without ever touching hardware, then you absolutely will go to a public cloud like Amazon and you will run it there. those of you, or to the extent you feel you need to or have to or want to run it in-house with full control over your stack, that's when you turn to an on-premise cloud provider like Eucalyptus. And that's the whole story there. MySQL in such an environment will run very well on that platform. Each shard or each node server is a separate instance in the cloud. It runs on an elastic block storage, and you can run your backups on a simple storage like the one that on Amazon is called S3, and in Eucalyptus parlance is called Walrus. And that's what it does for you. It makes it more elastic, makes it easier for you to be prepared for the stuff you cannot be prepared for, meaning unpredictable variable load that is difficult to predict. And in the long haul, what a cloud platform does for you, it increases utilization of your current hardware because it uses up all the resources wherever they are. And increased utilization over time, it turns out to be financial savings because you spend less money on hardware. You need no dedicated servers for dedicated applications, but instead you have a cloud, and you can use up as much of the cloud as you have available at any given time. Here's an architectural view of Eucalyptus. I'll leave it there for just a nanosecond for the hardcore engineers to look at, and we'll keep going. So in summary, why is data going to the cloud? Why is the world going to the cloud? We are seeing just an enormous growth in computing all over the world. Over the last 15 years, the middle class in the world has grown by 1 billion people. And middle class, they are people who have phones and laptops and computers, who have lots of needs that are served by computing power somewhere. We have an even stronger growth in data, where data is growing enormously fast, and somebody needs to analyze it, massage it, deal with it. And we have a huge growth in internet-linked devices. We used to have no internet connectivity on our body. Then we used to have one phone. Now we have a phone and a second phone, or an iPad or iPod or whatever. And all of this is creating a huge growth in computing, which is unpredictable, global, and at the same time uniform in the sense that it's on the internet and it follows standard protocols and behavior. So you can serve it with a cloud. And that is why cloud computing is becoming the new dominant design of infrastructure and taking over from client server. But client server has been around for 30 years. So when I preach the cloud message, I'm not stating that it will happen tomorrow. I believe in Bill Gibson when he said the future is here, it's just not widely distributed yet. Meaning we have cloud computing in many places, but it will take many years to really deploy it all over the world. But when that happens, it will be a massive, massive industry. And the databases needed here, if you're working on an existing one like MySQL or a new one, they need to be inherently built for distributed computing. Those databases need to, from the get-go, understand what it is like to run on 2 nodes, where suddenly one node dies and it's just on 1 node, and then it goes to 3 nodes and 10 nodes and then down to 5 nodes. And that sort of functionality or design philosophy wasn't around when the previous products were developed. But this, to me, is the key requirement on the new databases. And also how MySQL, who never really knew to scale up, was forced to scale out and now has become the dominant choice because a weakness turned into a strength. So with that, I'll stop here. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thanks for being such a fantastic MySQL community all these years, supporting the company, supporting the product, supporting everybody. And I look forward to many more exciting MySQL deployments on the cloud. Thank you very much.